I'm going to talk about what was my first book, because I think in it I already kind of start thinking about the questions I am still thinking of within this research group. And I'm going to half-heartedly apologize because what I think I always do is I create a narrative, I create a story, and I think that's the way in which I think about things. And we can talk about it later if what could be the usefulness or the activist qualities of these telling stories. So I'm going to talk about certain communities within social movements and their performative dimensions, and how through these performative dimensions and through these aesthetic interventions, they are creating prefigurative politics. So in this sense, it's like thinking about how artistic activism has a role in creating possible worlds which can be felt, which can be embodied, and which can be for some time inhabited. So the story which I created started within the British anti-roads movement, and in a way it all started with the 1989 and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the fall of a certain paradigm of utopianism and a certain paradigm of imagining utopia through the paradigm of socialism, of real existing socialism. And in Britain, it also had to do with a moment in which neoliberalism was having a power that didn't have before. This is the moment of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan coexisting in their ruling of the Anglo-Saxon supremacy, kind of. And it's also a moment in which in the UK, there is a grand plan for road building that was called Roads for Prosperity, and which was also begun in 1989, and which was described as the biggest road building project ever since the Romans. Can you see when I change slides? Okay, great. And this began a program of protests which created small camps which were erected in the way of the road building projects. So they were opposing the building of great infrastructures with their very presence. And the first anti-roads camp was in 1991. It was called Twyford Down, and you can see it in the image. And this gave way to a very broad movement which created spectacular images such as the Newbury protest camp, which with its interconnected tree houses in which activists went from one another, almost displaying circus-like abilities. There were also tunnels, and there was very sophisticated techniques which came from environmental direct action in different contexts, for example, from Australia. But there was also like distinct aesthetics that was developing, and it was mostly camps that were in the countryside defending natural spaces. But in 1993, the M11 road project also affected certain neighborhoods in London. So the more direct action linked to ecologism became linked to other forms of direct action linked to the city, such as the squatting movement. And in this anti-roads campaigns, houses were squatted, and tree houses were connected to squatted houses. And there was a daily practice of disobedience and of sabotage. For example, activists chained themselves to the cranes in order to avoid them working. But after a year of campaigning in 1994, only one line of houses was left, and this was the street of Claremont Road, where all of the houses had been squatted in the summer, and were an heterogeneous group of people which had among them squatters, but also artists and different kinds of people linked to the countercultural environment. They kind of created a kind of total work of art in the street with murals that were decorating the houses which had been evicted and which had different forms and different aesthetics. Here you can see a chess, which was interpreted as a kind of allegory of the fight against the state. And also traffic was forbidden because it was understood to be the underlying issue that was prompting the building of roads in the first place. So the cars that were in the area were turned into what one of the activists, Jay Jordan, called monuments to the end of automobile culture. And there was this daisy chain, which had a parallel inside the houses with holes in the walls to which people were going to chain themselves in the moment of eviction. So there was a tactical element to all of the aesthetic elements in the houses. And when the eviction came in the winter, these came to use. So the sculptures turned into barricades, or the sculptures were used as barricades. And there was also this element of ingravity, which has been one of the fantasies of art in the 20th century. This is Yves Klein and in his photo montage called Leap to the Void. And in Claremont Road, there was a spectacular level of ingravity created through this structure of a tower and networks. And networks? Do you call it networks? Yeah, okay. Which was creating like another level above the streets that existed isolated from the police and from the bailiffs who were conducting the eviction. And the eviction in relation to the past summer in the street, which had been turned into an enormous party, the eviction was turned into a party itself. And there was an enormous rave party going on in the street. There was a sound system on the top of the tower. And the activists referred to the disconcert attitude of policemen and bailiffs that had come for a confrontation and that just saw people dancing. So this was kind of a détournement and kind of turning an eviction into a victory in a way, even if the eviction was completed. So Claremont Road doesn't exist anymore, and the road was built, but the grand program of road building, of Roads for Prosperity, was abandoned. And also there was a social movement that's very clearly emerged from these protests, which was the Reclaim the Streets collective. Reclaim the Streets had already existed from 1991, but had disbanded, and its members had started to implicate themselves in the anti-roads movement. And in 1995, they came back together and decided to use the format which was most used in the end of Claremont Road, which is the big rave street party. And they started to use this format as a central format of their practice. So in 1995, they enacted the crash of two cars. And these two cars were actually acquired secondhand by members of the movement, and they were crashing so that the traffic in the street could be blocked. And the first banner was displayed, and the first street party was danced in London's Camden Town area. And this party had free toys for children. There was music being played thanks to the generators, which were powered by bicycles. And there was this idea of creating what Hacking Bay, in the terms of Hacking Bay, was very popular at that time, which was the temporary autonomous zone. And the parties would grow in size very quickly after this first party in 1995. So the second party in 1995 already had thousands of people. And in this party, there was sand that was brought to the road in a kind of reenactment of the motto of 1968 under the cobblestones, the beach. So here there was over the cobblestones, there was a beach. And there was also stilt walkers who were walking up and down the streets. Here you can see the enormous numbers of policemen, which, however, could not stop the party. And these stilt walkers would say hello, and they would walk up and down, and they would play bagpipes. But because of the noise, you couldn't see that in reality, under their enormous skirts, there was activists from Reclaim the Streets, which were making holes in the ground in order to plant trees which had been brought up from the area of the Claremont Road. So there was a flyer that was circulating that also said that the idea was that the streets were bringing back the commons for the street parties were bringing back the commons for a while, and also that the forest was coming back. So on top of the tarmac, the trees. There was also this game with 1968. And the poetic energy of these kind of actions would make the parties grow in size, and other social movements were coming together through the format of the party. And in 1999, there was a call for a carnival against capital, which was going to take place in different areas in different cities of the world. This is the banner and this is the flyer from London. And in London, the crowds would take the central space of the city, the financial district, because this carnival was going to take place in the financial districts. And it was incredibly successful. It also made a change in what was normally an area marked by the aesthetics of business. There's all these banners that were changing the meaning of the space. And the carnival was so successful that its planners only were sad that they didn't plan for a grand scale occupation. In a way, you could think that the temporary autonomous zones created by Reclaim the Streets bring to mind these traditions of the land of plenty, of Cocaine, of Sharafanland, of these moments of extreme freedom and extreme plenty, which can connect to non-authoritarian traditions of utopianism. When the Carnival Against Capital was celebrated, sorry, I'm trying to go quickly, so I'm kind of accelerated. When this carnival was convoked, there was already the convocation. Do you say convocation? There is also already the planning, the call for Seattle, which was going to be a very grand moment for the globalization of all these protest aesthetics that were going on. However, before Seattle, what is more important is the encuentro, which was called for by the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional, an indigenous movement which had started an insurrection in 1994 in Mexico, in the Chiapas area, and which in 1996 had called for a global gathering of social movements, which had been incredibly important in bringing together social movements that were acting separately. And all these social movements after this encuentro would start to think how they could act together in different and non-homogenizing ways. So actually the Carnival Against Capital was a result of this bringing together of social movements. But what would be the global coming out party in terms of Naomi Klein would be the Seattle Counter Summit against the World Trade Organization, which would inaugurate or would popularize a form of acting that would bring together activists in the same places as the transnational organizations of financial power were meeting. So in Seattle, in the Christmas moment, at the same time as the World Trade Organization was meeting, there was a global meeting of social movements, which would exist in the city with broad repression, but which nevertheless would impede the celebration of the World Trade Organization summit, just by their very presence in the streets, just by their very bodies, which were blocking the city so that the delegates of the World Trade Organization could not actually reach the place where their meeting was going to take place. In Seattle, you could see that this paradigm, this is Giuseppe Pelizza da Volpedo, a painting which represented the fourth estate. In Seattle, you could see that this paradigm that had to do with a mass of people more or less unified, you can see kind of the same chromatism, more or less advancing in the same direction and following a small group of leaders. This paradigm, which was part of a socialism paradigm, had been united with this other paradigm, which is the paradigm of the countercultural festival, the countercultural party, the paradigm of the carnival. And in this sense of carnival, groups with a distinct appearance would appear, such as, for example, the white overalls, which protected themselves from the attacks of the police with helmets and with different DIY objects, which would ease the strength of confrontations. and which remind us a little bit of artworks from the same time. This is Nexus by artist Lucy Orta. Or the Pink Bloc, which would respond to the police with what they called tactical frivolity, or elements of humor, ridicule, and absurdness, which, as you can see in this montage, in the beginning made the police go back in sheer disconcert attitude. However, all these strategies would soon prove themselves not enough in front of the police violence that was already displayed extremely strongly in Geneva in 2001, in which the police killed one activist called Carlo Giuliani, and also was incredibly aggressive in the convention center where other activists and journalists were sleeping. So this gave way to a reflection on how to think more about tactical frivolity and also about social forms of disobedience. But the strength of what was called the anti-globalization movement or the global justice movement, there's different denominations, would be fundamental in organizing an anti-war movement, which would have a very big development in 2003 with the war of Iraq. Sorry, I need 1 second because I have this phone number, which I think is from the hospital. Just 1 second. Sí. Sí. Sí, dígame. Es bajo izquierda. Sí. Perdone, un segundo. Sí, efectivamente. Gracias. Hasta luego. Adiós. Sorry. So this was like a slight pause. So 2001 was not only the moment of the death of Carlo Giuliani, it was also the year in which the Twin Towers of New York were thrown back by a terrorist attack. It was also the year of the enormous economic crisis of Argentina and the subsequent moment of popular rebellion which took place. So in many ways, it was a turning point. And activist forces, which came from all this moment of effervescence, were to come together in the anti-war movement, as we were saying, of 2003. But however, there was going to be a kind of a moment in which activism stopped being so effervescent, perhaps because of the repression that followed the Twin Towers, perhaps because of the war going on in spite of all of the activist movements. Some people have spoken of the desert of the 2000s. We can talk more about it after the effervescence of the 90s and the early 2000s. In these moments, you could also see how artists were taking up aesthetics from activism. This is Sharon Hayes's work, in which she's playing with the banners of the civil rights movement, or this is the No by activists against the dictatorship in Chile, and being picked up by Santiago Sierra in his No Global tour. So you could see all this kind of dialogue taking place in this time, or even appropriation. And in 2011, there was another great explosion after some time of silence, and this explosion was the movement of the squares in 2011. There was, I took this banner which says No nos vamos, because one of the mottos in Argentina was no se va, el pueblo no se va. It won't go, the people won't go. And this banner says, we won't go. The movement of the squares was following the global spring, the Arab Spring, with the enormous camp, which was became famous, the enormous camp of Tahrir Square in El Cairo in Egypt, and which was a very clear prompt to the next wave, which would take place after mobilization in Madrid in 15th of May 2011, to which there would follow the creation of an activist camp, which started getting built in the 17th of May, by placing cardboard on the floor and tarpaulins on different structures, such as lampposts and a sculpture in the square. There is this structure of ropes, to which these structure of textiles, plastic, would you say that? Carpa in Spanish? Was harps. And the small city in miniature, similar to the one that had existed in Egypt, was built in the square of Puerta del Sol. It lasted almost 1 month. And in it, there was all this banners which were displayed one on top of another, and which were creating kind of an open air book of social change, in which solutions to the crisis were displayed by a popular political thinking, and also an interpretation of the crisis, the economical crisis of 2008 and the austerity measures. There was a popular interpretation against the interpretation that was espoused by politicians and banking institutions. So there is this kind of parallel between a continuous practice of general assemblies and a continuous practice of banner making, as if there was this taking up of the word as a popular and as an insurrectionary practice. And there was also all these things were being collected by a committee of archive. The square was working through a system of committees. So we have many of these banners which are still, we can still visit them because they are still stored by an activist archive with which I was also collaborating, which keeps all these very precarious banners, in which the very precariousness of its material form and its aesthetic speaks of a certain roughness and a certain immediacy of these banners, in which political empowerment seems to be coming together with aesthetic empowerment. So I'm just going to show some of these banners, and I think I'm going to leave it here so we have some time to talk. And of course, after Madrid, there would be camps in the rest of Spain and in the rest of Europe and in Greece, and then eventually also in the USA. But I'm going to leave it here. I really like this one. You can.